Hey, what's going on, AP guys? We have Key Concept 4.2 for you today from Period 4, which covers the time 1800 to 1848. So this is a big part of the curriculum that you should be familiar with. Before we start, I would like to give a shout out to Mrs. Vaughn. Thank you so much for your support. I understand you use these videos in your classroom, and the students think you are the best teacher. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, let's take a look at Key Concept 4.2. It states developments in technology, agriculture, and commerce precipitated profound changes in U.S. settlement patterns, regional identities, gender and family relations, political power, and distribution of consumer goods. That's a lot. So focus on these big ideas as we go through this video. What were the social and economic impacts of the market revolution, or really the first industrial revolution, on immigrants, men, women, natives, and African Americans? Why did the South develop a separate identity from other regions? And why did sectionalism develop during this time? Was the government successful at reducing sectional tensions? Why or why not? All right, let's look at Key Concept 4.2, Roman numeral 1, a global market and communications revolution influencing and influenced by technological innovations led to dramatic shifts in the nature of agriculture and manufacturing. So let's talk about some technological innovations that increased efficiency and extended markets. Keep in mind, all of these inventions really made production more efficient, faster, and allowed more goods to reach markets further away. So we have textile machines, things like the spinning jenny, which made production faster of textiles or cloth. Steam engines is another example, and this allowed boats to go against the current. This is important when it comes to shipping products on rivers. You could go upstream or against the current. So this allows for faster shipping. Interchangeable parts were invented by this guy, Eli Whitney, and they helped increase production significantly. So think of interchangeable parts as like a cookie cutter. You can make the exact same shaped cookie every single time. Interchangeable parts allowed, for instance, gun manufacturers to use the exact same trigger every single time, and they were easier to produce, and if something broke, it was easier to fix. You didn't need to track down the gunsmith who made the gun. You can simply just find the part for that gun. Eli Whitney also invented something else that drastically changed the economy of the United States, especially the southern economy. Do you know what it is? You should. It was the cotton gin. So interchangeable parts and cotton gin were both invented by Eli Whitney. We have the emergence of canals, which allows for shipping of goods farther and further, and no canal was more significant at this than the Erie-canal in New York State. Railroads began to emerge during this time, especially in the 1830s and 40s, and this allows for shipping to increase drastically. It really kind of puts canals out of business as well. The telegraph allows for information to be spread more rapidly. And this guy, Samuel Slater, he actually came to America from Britain dressed in a disguise, and he had memorized blueprints for a factory. So he is known as the father of the American factory system. More and more Americans are shifting during this time period from subsistence farming, or farming to survive and grow enough food for yourself, to producing goods. And some entrepreneurs even focus on financing. An example of this is the Lowell system in Lowell, Massachusetts. This is a factory system in which farmers' daughters worked in factories in 8-hour shifts, and they were provided boarding houses and dormitories, and they actually were paid pretty darn well for that time period. So this is an example of more and more Americans shifting from subsistence farming to producing goods. All right, let's go to Key Concept 4.2, Roman numeral 2. Regional economic specialization, especially the demands of cultivating southern cotton, shaped settlement patterns in the national and international economy. And it's amazing to look at this picture of cotton and to understand the tremendous impact that it had on the development of not only the United States, but especially the South. So let's go to the impacts of cotton. The raw material of cotton was used in textile production in the Northeast. So the cotton would be grown in the South and shipped to the Northeast and turned into finished products. Economic ties will increase between each region because each region, the North, the South, and the West, will specialize in something specific, and they will trade with each other. Trade with European countries, especially Britain and France, helped shape the international economy, and it all goes back to cotton. The internal slave trade increased as demand for slaves increased as well, and the demand for slaves increased because of cotton. So here's a question: why, after 1808 especially, does the internal slave trade increase? What happens in 1808? Do you remember? Yes, you do. The international slave trade was outlawed. So now the internal, or within the United States, the slave trade will increase. There are efforts to create a unified national economy, but these never really come to full fruition. In the North and the Midwest were linked closely together, more so than was the South. An example of a unified national economic system is my boy Henry Clay and his American system. It focused on three parts. One, internal improvements, and examples of this are roads and canals. Two, tariffs, especially the tariff of 1816, and the goal was to fund internal improvements with those tariffs, and that they were protective tariffs as well to protect American industries. And also he was in favor of the Bank of the United States, not the original one from Alexander Hamilton's days. That one had expired. He was in favor of the newer one. And I do have a separate video on Henry Clay's American system. Check it out in the description below to get more detail on it. And the American system did have its critics. There were people who debated the role of government in inter versus intrastate trade, meaning should the federal government fund or intrastate improvements, meaning roads that ran only through one state. And Andrew Jackson is an example of that. He vetoed the Maysville Road project, which would fund the Maysville Road, which was entirely in Kentucky of Henry Clay's home state. All right, so what are the impacts of this nation seeking natural resources? Well, we have the free migration of people, and as the population grew in America, and it did drastically, and threats were removed, especially Native Americans in the West after the War of 1812. More Americans are expanding west. Lots of farmers, they want to make money, so they begin to move out west. Infrastructure as well, the building of this really helped encourage westward expansion. Roads, and again, the Erie-canal, I can't keep saying that enough. It really impacted the migration of people further west. We have the forced migration of people in the Americas at this time. Again, slavery as it is expanding further and further west, and we'll see in the next time period in the new AP curriculum. This is a cause of the Civil War. And Native Americans were forced west as well with the Indian Removal Act, which leads to the Trail of Tears. And here's a map of the different paths that Native Americans had to take after the Indian Removal Act. New labor systems emerged. We have unions beginning to develop, and the Massachusetts State Supreme Court case, Commonwealth versus Hunt, in this, the state Supreme Court ruled that labor unions were legal. So this is really the beginning of unions, and they'll become more common and more influential in later years, especially post-Civil War. So we'll finish up with key concept 4.2, Roman numeral 3. The economic changes caused by the market revolution had significant effects on migration patterns, gender and family relations, and the distribution of political power. So again, I'm going to talk about canals. I hope you see a trend here in this video. The canals and roads really increased American migration westward. And here is the Erie-canal. It is 363 miles long from Albany all the way over to where I'm living in Buffalo. And you'll notice it connects to Lake Erie. And this will allow shippers to go even further west out to the Midwest. They could reach as far as Chicago through the Great Lakes. Canals and roads made it easier for westward expansion and shipment of goods, and new community systems developed that replaced old family and local relationships back east. Some examples of this include churches, schools, taverns, etc. that begin to develop, and religion is going to play a very instrumental role. A lot of these towns will have gatherings for Bible readings, especially in rural areas. The church is really going to bring a lot of people together. Immigrants from Europe tended to settle in the East and the Midwest, and there's two groups that you should know at this time. And this will lead to increased interdependence between the Northeast and the Old Northwest. So you have the East and the West. Immigrants are moving there, and they'll become more connected. Now, the two groups you should know is that Germans tended to settle in Ohio as farmers, or in the West as farmers. And keep in mind, when I'm saying West in this video, we're really talking about Ohio and Indiana, that area there. And the Irish tended to settle in cities as urban workers, and they came here in huge numbers in the 1840s and 1850s because of the Irish potato famine. So this was killing lots of people in Ireland, so many people fled to America. The South remained distinct and separate compared to other regions at this time. Culturally, the plantations helped define the region. They were so economically profitable. Many wealthy elites viewed themselves as aristocrats, and they really had a lot of power. Politically, plantation owners again had significant power, and laws were created that protected and reinforced slavery. You have things like slave codes, which regulate the behavior of slaves. Ideologically, honor in the South was different than the North. Dueling persisted in the South much longer than it did in the North. You have writers like George Fitzhugh, who was a defender of slavery, and he even said this of women. Women, like children, have but one right, and that is the right of protection. The right to protection involves the obligation to obey. So this is kind of a good idea of Southern views of society versus Northern views. And exports to Europe fueled economic growth. Again, it's all about cotton. Its name was King Cotton because it made so much money. The amount of money that the South brought in selling cotton not only to the North but to European countries as well was enormous. So as a result of the market revolution, the gap between the rich and the poor increased. We have a new emerging middle class developing. And home and workplace became more separate. It used to be that all goods were made in the house. Now we begin to see a shift more towards factories, or at least the early beginnings of factories. People worked outside the home more often, and gender and family roles and expectations changed drastically. There was this idea of the cult of domesticity, which is around for a very long time. And this advocated separate spheres for women. And the expectation was to be subordinate to men and to raise children. I don't know about you, this sounds a lot like Republican motherhood to me. A famous woman that kind of challenged the cult of domesticity was Lydia Maria Child. She was an abolitionist and a women's rights activist. She first wanted to focus on abolitionism, and once slaves would get their freedom, she believed women would get more freedom as well. And sectionalism, not nationalism, was a major focus for many political leaders' stances on several issues. So slavery. We see increasing tensions between the North and the South as the 19th century went on, especially when we get to the Fugitive Slave Law in 1850. The National Bank, again, part of Henry Clay's American system. The Northeast tended to favor the Bank of the United States or the bus, and the South was against it. And internal improvements. Many in the West, like Henry Clay, would favor these internal improvements. That's because the West was not as developed as other areas. And tariffs tended to be favored by northern manufacturers and disliked by southerners because they would have to pay higher prices for imported goods. All right, let's finish up with some test tips for multiple choice and short answer questions. Definitely know the impact of technology on industry and agriculture. Be familiar with the reasons for immigration and westward expansion during this time, and what is the impact of the market revolution. It's basically this whole video. Know the American system as well. For essay questions, be able to explain reasons for sectional tensions and the emergence of unique regional identities, not just the South, but also in the North and the West as well. And again, the impact of the market revolution. How does it change American society? All right, guys, that is everything you need to know for Key Concept 4.2. I thank you guys very much for watching. And if you have not already, please take a moment and subscribe to my channel and help me spread the word. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I thank you guys very much for watching and have a good day.